When you think of some of the most successful horror movie villains, there are all sorts of strange and unsettling types that have risen up to scare us silly over the years. What unites each of them in their crusade for browning our trousers, of course, is a terrifying and singular urge to kill. They're often voiceless, sometimes motiveless, always relentless, as if they're designed to be personifications of the threat of death itself. They are a reminder of mortality at its most scary, really, no matter how goofy they end up looking in internet memes after their cinematic debuts. But there is a specific breed of villain out there, a more cerebral group, whose evil is amplified precisely because of their intellect. They might have a different fear factor than a Michael Myers or a Jason Voorhees chasing characters like morbid superhumans or a supernatural foe that you can't reason with. But make no mistake, they are just as dangerous and just as terrifying. And there is nothing quite as scary as knowing your own personal monster knows exactly what they're doing. Sideshow Bob, eat your heart out. I am the evil genius, Ash from What Culture, and these are the 10 smartest horror movie villains. 10. Dr. Billy Weir, Event Horizon. Sci-fi horror mashups are always going to increase the likelihood of intelligent characters because, well, it's in the title. It's the science. Easily one of the most notorious sci-fi horrors of all time, Event Horizon introduces a perversely irresistible monster who starts out as a normal smart guy. Dr. William Weir, played wonderfully by Sam Neill, is the designer of the titular ship, a brilliant man of unimaginable scientific prowess. Which means we're in store for some unimaginable scientific foulness. Sorry, I just wanted to make that rhyme, but it does the job. Anyway, he's the reason the ship is capable of its incredible feats, and also the reason it ends up going to the Hell Dimension and becoming sentient, so it swings and roundabouts. When the ship reclaims him as its murderous puppet, he becomes a combination of terrifying animal rage and Weir's existing intelligence. Truly, he's quite the double threat. 9. Annie Wilkes, Misery. On the surface of things, Annie Wilkes doesn't seem like the sharpest tool in the shed. Her passion for Paul Sheldon's romance novels, which even he believes he is too good to be writing, is designed to lull us and Paul into the false assumption that she is, to put crassly, dim. It's also doubled down upon by her mispronunciations of words, which hits far too close to home, quite frankly. But therein lies Sheldon's biggest mistake. Annie is a far more formidable intellect than she lets on. Her past reveals she is a university graduate and worked in medicine, and that's just in the sense of her traditional smarts. She was obviously clever enough to cover her tracks when she murdered the children in her care. And her plotting to keep Paul locked up hints at the true depth of her cunning and what a real threat she is. Wilkes also managed to deduce most of Sheldon's plotting to escape before he's ever really had much of a chance to enact them. And while she's clearly somewhat clouded by her obsessive personality, her cunning is off the charts for someone who cleverly presents themselves as the other way. 8. Jack Torrance, The Shining. You might think that Jack Torrance's descent into mania and murderous intention is thanks to him having a fundamentally broken mind, but that isn't quite true. Jack starts out as a smart, imaginative man who simply makes the mistake of ignoring the warnings that the Overlook Hotel hands out. That isn't necessarily a lapse of intellect either. It's more like a part of his own personal haunting as the place gets into his head. Jack is a writer and a former teacher doomed by his past to relive the sins of his abusive father, though that detail is explored only in the novel. And the entire tragedy of the film is that he falls to animalism and brutality, first to his alcoholism and then to his possession by the hotel. We're effectively watching Stephen King's anxiety dream about the conflict between his own intelligent, creative brain and his self-destructive tendencies. And whilst Jack becomes a traditional slasher sort of villain, it is precisely because of what he is beneath that he really sells the weight of that transformation. He was mean and a mind at war, but you cannot doubt his brilliance, which makes him such a danger when he turns. 7. Seth Brundle, The Fly. Like Billy Weir from Event Horizon, Seth Brundle is another brilliant mind seeking scientific advancement who rather unwittingly ends up bearing a morality tale about overreaching. And like Weir, the warning is revisited on his own body. In The Fly, Brundle's goal is to develop a teleportation system. Having mastered molecular physics at the age of just 20, he's basically on the same sort of level as Einstein at this point. But passion corrupts, and Brundle is undone by jealousy, which leads to a premature test of his telepods and the notorious accidental transformation into the Brundlefly. And whilst the creature might look like a subhuman monster, it retains Brundle's mind. warped grotesquely admittedly, so it is basically a hybrid of the brilliant and the disgusting. 6. Pennywise, It. Can you really say that a killer demon that hangs around in dark places and lures children to their deaths is all that smart? Of course you can, because that reading of It's Pennywise disregards all of the nuance of his being. Pennywise is a master manipulator, deceitful, conniving and cunning, who manages to tune into the fears of everyone through telepathy and intellect, and uses them to guide a reign of terror. It's the manner in which he applies the knowledge of his victims' fears that really sets him apart, finding ways to separate groups, engineering circumstances where they incubate his terrorizing themselves. It is all incredibly impressive, particularly when you consider how fragile it is to its victims fighting back. And for him to be able to cover all of that up using a trick as simple as a memory charm is so utterly inspired that it gets completely overlooked in light of all of his other horrifying tricks. 5. David 8. Alien Covenant. Being an android might seem like cheating in this respect, but hey, the best horror bends all sorts of rules, which is sort of the point with this one. Alien Covenant is a curious beast in that it presents itself both as an Alien prequel and something else entirely, because the story is more in service of exploring David the android as a villain rather than the xenomorphs. It's another of those Promethean anxiety tales which presents David as the conclusion to mankind's deadly need to continue pushing and pushing on technology until it bites us all in the ass. David is an instrument of human destruction, a being intrigued by the Oedipal cycle of wanting to kill the father, but with a cold, calculated agenda and not one driven by passion. He is remarkably intelligent, because of course he is, but adds a near-human sense of manipulation and cunning to his armory. His lack of real humanity only makes him that much more terrifying when coupled with his insane computing intelligence. 4. Count Dracula. While it's an area that is generally underdeveloped when it comes to modern tellings of the Dracula story, his life before death was one marked by academic and military brilliance. He was an alchemist with, and I quote, a mighty brain, a learning beyond compare, and a heart that knew no fear and no remorse. There was no branch of knowledge of his time that he did not essay, in Stoker's own words. He was cunning, clever, and dangerously committed to the black arts. And that's where the spark behind his eyes comes from as a vampire. Sure, he is seductive in a sort of intoxicating, supernatural way, but his wit and conniving brain plays a major part too. He is also vastly knowledgeable, having amassed his wisdom over centuries, and it is applied that his mastery of death is partly thanks to his intellect and not just his dealing with the devil. Almost as if he is literally so clever he simply knows how to not die. Unless there's garlic involved, then who knows? Dracula is no mere monster. He's able to exist in refined society, is steeped in ages of culture, and hides incredibly well despite his fits of passion. Except in Blade Trinity, where he's just rubbish. But still. 3. Pinhead, HELLRAISER. Pinhead is a rare breed, considering where his debut came in horror movie history. Far from the brainless slasher monsters that were popular in the 1980s, he was designed to be the antithesis of such simplicity, a quiet but intelligent creature with more in common with Count Dracula. Producers at the time thought it was a mistake, given the success of the likes of Freddy Krueger. But Clive Barker dug his heels in, sticking to his belief that intelligence is fundamentally terrifying. And he's correct. Monsters like Pinhead are all the more devastatingly scary because they are clearly aware of what they're doing. His twisted intelligence is even more affecting than his iconic look. He's no animal, and instinct doesn't really come into it as an excuse. His is a measured, considered evil that means he has weighed up the morality and the implications of what he does and rejected them anyway. 2. Hannibal Lecter, The Silence of the Lambs. Like Pinhead and Dracula, Hannibal Lecter's genius as a horror movie character is linked to both his smarts and the quiet demeanour he constructs as a front. He's another of those villains who has probably painstakingly considered the morality of his actions, but revels in the perversion of it instead of packing it in. In traditional terms, Lecter is a brilliant, astute man, an academic with unrivaled insight into the human condition and psychology. But for the same reason, he is a near unprecedented threat to those that come into his trap. Lecter's cold, unfaltering exterior is an extension of his intellect. He's so brilliant, he's almost sociopathic in how he comes across. Removed, cold, detached, but it's a construct to hide the animal inside. And were it not quite so driven by passion in the moment, he would top this list without question. So who could possibly outshine him? 1. Jigsaw, Saw. The movies he starred in might not be the most fiercely intelligent by any means, but their simple, irresistible hook all comes from John Kramer's genius. He is a man loaded with an unfeasible mind for plotting, an intricately creative capacity for dreaming up the worst traps, but also working on how to get his players into them. Kramer is also dangerous on another level to everyone else because of the nature of his evil. There's tragedy behind his transformation from a skilled civil engineer to a master of manipulating, and a relentless and obsessive murderer. He simply wanted to teach everyone the lesson that life is precious and their misuse of their time on Earth deserves either punishment or the short, sharp shock needed to guide them in another direction. Kramer's ability to find these people, or orchestrate his network to do so, is impressive enough. But how he comes up with his intricate and devilish traps is even better, particularly as he has to approach some of them in multiple layers to really get one up on those involved. He's basically the most impressive strategist in movie history. Take that, every war biopic ever! And that's our list. What other dastardly villains deserve a shout-out? It's only 10 long, so honourable mention goes to the Invisible Man and Billy and Stu's stand-up job tricking their town in Scream. But share your thoughts on who else belongs here in the comment section below.